Very good afternoon. These are the top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. The Chancellor says that closer relations with the EU will boost the economy and drive up living standards as she meets European finance leaders in Brussels. As job vacancies fall at their fastest rate in over a year, we'll be joined by the boss of Iceland to ask about how tax rises announced in the budget are affecting businesses. Plus, Sky signs a multi-year deal with Warner Brothers Discovery to give its customers access to TV and films such as Succession, The White Lotus, and the highly anticipated Harry Potter series. Very good afternoon and welcome to Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey, on this Monday. Just to let you know, we'll also be in the Commons almost certainly in the next half an hour, covering the Foreign Secretary who has given a statement on Syria. We'll join David Lammy in the Commons as soon as he gets on his feet. But first, let's stop, because demand for new staff among businesses has slumped to levels not seen since during the pandemic, as firms consider the effects of the budget. A report by the Recruitment and Employment Confederation suggested that the tax raid on employers announced by the Chancellor forced those same employers to reassess their hiring needs. Well, let's speak to the Managing Director of Iceland. That is Richard Walker, who joins me now. Very good afternoon to you, Richard. A lot to get through in this interview. I want to start, though, with the idea that businesses are thinking about hiring fewer people. And there are concerns about a drag on the economy going into next year. Is that something that you're concerned about too?
No, because we've got through so much in our 54-year history. You know, in the 70s, obviously sky-high interest and inflation, right through to COVID, supply shocks because of the war in Ukraine. And last year, when we had a £100 million increase in our energy bill because of the situation in Ukraine. So we've weathered a lot of storms. And look, undoubtedly, you know, this is a tough budget for business. There's no doubt about that. But I think the key thing now for business is adaptation and action, and innovating in products and processes and for the customer. So that's what we're focused on. And actually, we're looking forward to a strong trading over Christmas and indeed next year, where we're planning on opening hopefully 20 plus new shops, which will be 30 jobs per shop, which is £1.5 million of investment per shop and lots of local taxes as well. So we're confident.
You got a little further today, though, in your article in the Telegraph newspaper, saying the company should stop wallowing and complaining about the budget. Why?
Yeah, I think it was in the context of announcing our latest cost of living initiative, which are interest-free microloans for our customers. Hopefully we'll get onto that. But really it's to show that, you know, as I said, it's a tough budget, but Iceland are in a strong position and we're stepping up. You know, I think it's time for businesses to stop wallowing and to play their part and focus on what comes next. The government aren't going to change anything, and you know we've got to deal with the cards that we're dealt. So we're very much focused on our response, and you know we're going to make that very customer focused.
Yeah, and you're suggesting, and you know that's a good place to be, isn't it? That Iceland can weather this significant tax hike. We speak to businesses all the time on Business Live, big and small, it must be said, who don't think they can cope with this. They do not think that the balance sheets will be able to deal with such a tax hike. Isn't your remarks a little insensitive at best?
No, listen, I've no doubt this will be tough for many businesses, Iceland included, but it's about mitigation and adaptation. That's you know all I'm trying to say effectively, and I think we need to focus on what comes next. The other thing I'd say as well, whilst this was a record taxing budget, I think what's really important is what the government does with the tax, and therefore I'll be watching very closely in terms of what the plan is for investment, for growth. And I think that's really important. The things that I've long campaigned on in terms of high street review to really help all bricks and mortar businesses, not just Iceland, business rate reform, a proper industrial strategy.
Okay.
These are vitally important things. And I think, in 4.5 years' time, no business would begrudge the government if that money is spent wisely.
Okay, but what would you say to maybe some of your critics who suggest you've been a bit political here? You're now a Labour supporter and you're simply defending the government.
No, listen, I've got no incentive or interest in defending the government. I'm not a member of any party.
But you do support Labour, though, don't you?
You're right. At the election, I did publicly support Labour, and let's see what they do.
Yeah. Well, on that note, then, if they raise taxes again on business, do you think that would be unfair? You say this may be necessary. Business needs to do its bit. Do you think this is the limit, essentially? The government should not go any further, or are you perfectly happy with them raising taxes yet again?
Well, obviously, I don't want endless tax increases, and I believe they've said that they won't. Business is not, of course, an endless sponge that can suck up endless tax increases or cost increases, and we are dealing with a lot. So that's why I think now it's about looking to what they do with the money in terms of investing for growth.
OK, and just, Richard, very finally, we did say we'll get you on to talk about this new scheme, and you are essentially potentially giving money, or loaning money, I should say, to customers to help them out.
Yeah, and again, this is about investing in innovative solutions, given the cost of living crisis and the context of how a lot of our customers are faring. The Iceland Food Club are microloans. We're anything between £25 to £75, and they're interest-free. And this is ultimately so that our customers can afford to buy food and avoid the need for food banks. Now, we've been carefully researching and trialling this for 2 years, and the social impact results are fantastic. And most importantly, it keeps people out of the hands of predatory loan sharks. So it's something I'm really proud of, and I think it's an exciting opportunity for other businesses as well.
Richard, appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Richard Walker there, the Managing Director of Iceland Supermarket. Thank you. Now, Rachel Reeves is pushing for closer ties with the EU as she joins a meeting of European finance ministers in Brussels today. It's the first time a British Chancellor has attended such a meeting since Brexit, and she said it would improve trade if there was a reset, if you like, on relations with the EU. Let's listen in.
I was really pleased and overwhelmed, really, by the response that I had from finance ministers across the European Union who want to reset, rebuild the relationships between our countries, and to have a more business-like relationship between the European Union and the UK.
OK, let's bring in Gurpreet Narwan, our business and economics correspondent, this afternoon. What's the meat on the bones, if you like, about this? We've heard lots, haven't we, about the resets with the EU, really since Labour came into government. But any real sense of what that practically means?
Well, it's a good question, Darren. I think what we got today was more another sort of symbolic moment, the Treasury eager to present this as a symbolic moment. And indeed, in many ways, it is. It's the first time, as you said, that a British Chancellor has addressed the Eurogroup of finance ministers. It's why you heard Rachel Reeves use the word milestone. This is kind of a sign of things to come. It's a direction of travel towards closer relationships with Europe. And arguably, that was more significant than any of the nitty-gritty details, of which there were few. Rachel Reeves, when asked about kind of some of the details of the conversation, said that these weren't negotiations, that negotiations would begin in the new year, that she hasn't gone to the Europeans with a list of demands. But she said that this was the beginning of a reset with Europe. And that's a phrase that we've heard from this Labour government repeatedly over the past few months. Indeed, it's something that we actually heard from Andrew Bailey in a rare intervention at Rachel Reeves' Mansion House speech last month, where he said it was necessary for Britain to rebuild relationships with Europe. The question that you asked, and the question that we should all be asking, of course, is, well, what do these closer relationships actually look like? Labour has already said, it's already ruled out rejoining the single market all the customs unions. That is red lines that Rachel Reeves repeated again today when asked about that. But the government is hoping that there's a lot it can achieve in this.
OK, Gurpreet, I'm just going to interrupt you there because we're going to take you now to the Commons to listen to the Foreign Secretary making a statement on Syria.
Over less than a fortnight, there has been an extraordinary change. What began as an opposition offensive in northwestern Syria quickly became a headlong retreat by pro-Assad forces, and over the weekend, the fall of his murderous regime. On the 30th of November, the regime withdrew from Aleppo. On the 5th of December, Hama. On the 6th of December, Dara and Homs. And on the 7th of December, Damascus. Madam Deputy Speaker, as this government came into office, some in the international community and some in this House asked whether we would re-engage with Assad. His Russian and Iranian allies have long championed him. Last year, he returned to the Arab League, and increasingly other governments were also starting to step up their presence in Damascus. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government chose not to re-engage. We said no, because Assad is a monster. We said no because Assad was a dictator whose sole interest was his wealth and his power. And we said no because Assad is a criminal who defied all laws and norms to use chemical weapons against the Syrian people. We said no because Assad is a butcher with the blood of countless innocents on his hands. And we said no because Assad was a drug dealer funding his regime through Captagon and illicit finance. And we said no because he was never, ever going to change. There were those who used to call Assad the Lion of Damascus. Now we see the reality. Assad is the rat of Damascus, fleeing to Moscow with his tail between his legs. How fitting he should end up there. We see streets of Syrians cheering his demise, tearing down his statues, reuniting with loved ones who have been disappeared. We have long hoped to see him gone and welcome the opportunity this brings for the people of Syria. Assad's demise is not just a humiliation to him and his henchmen, it is a humiliation for Russia and Iran. Iran's so-called axis of resistance is crumbling before our eyes. And Vladimir Putin's attempts to prop up Assad for more than a decade. And all that he's got for this is a fallen dictator filing for asylum in Moscow. He says he wants to return Russia to its imperial glory, but after more than 1,000 days, he has not subjugated Ukraine. Putin's fake empire stopped short just a few miles out of Donetsk. I have no fear of it, only disgust. Of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, our revulsion of Assad, his henchmen, and those who propped him up must not blind us to the risks of this moment. Assad's demise brings no guarantee of peace. This is a moment of danger, as well as opportunity for Syrians and for the region. The humanitarian situation in Syria is dire, with almost 17 million people in need. Millions are refugees, largely still in neighbouring Turkey, Lebanon and Jordan. Seeing so many start to return to Syria is a positive sign for their hopes for a better future now that Assad is gone. But a lot depends on what happens now. This flow into Syria could quickly become a flow back out and potentially increase the numbers using dangerous illegal migration routes to continental Europe and the United Kingdom. Syria has also proven a hotbed of extremism. This House will know that the group whose offensive first pushed back the regime, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS as it's now being called, are also a proscribed terrorist organisation in the UK as an alias of Al-Qaeda. That should rightly make us cautious. Thus far, HTS has offered reassurances to minorities in Aleppo, Hama, and Damascus. They have also committed to cooperating with the international community over monitoring chemical weapons. We will judge ATS by their actions, monitoring closely how they and other parties to this conflict treat all civilians in areas they control. The UK and our allies have spent over a decade combating terrorism in Syria. Daesh remains one of the most significant terrorist threats to the UK, our allies, and our interests overseas. We take seriously our duty as government to protect the public from this and other terrorist threats. Amid this uncertainty, the government has three priorities. First and foremost, protecting all civilians, including, of course, minorities. For more than a decade, Syria has been racked by terrible sectarian violence. We continue to do what we can to provide humanitarian support wherever we can. The UK has spent over £4 billion on the Syrian crisis to date. UK-funded mobile medical units already provide emergency services across northern Syria. Last week, we gave a further £300,000 to the White Helmets. And today, the Prime Minister has announced an additional £11 million of humanitarian support for Syria.
OK, we're just going to interrupt David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary there, just to bring you up to date with some breaking news that we've covered here on Business Live, but also on Sky over the last couple of days or so. You may remember essentially the shooting of the CEO in New York, in Manhattan, last week. Well, a man is now being questioned in connection with the fatal shooting of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, who was gunned down in the centre of New York last week. He was shot dead outside his hotel on Wednesday morning, where he's due there for his company's annual conference. It sparked a citywide and then a nationwide manhunt. Well, our US partner, NBC, is reporting that a man now is being questioned in connection with that fatal shooting in New York. OK, let's return back to David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, making that statement in the Commons on the situation in Syria.
Part of Assad's playbook, and it's a part of Putin's playbook and the playbook of dictators and criminals around the world. This hurts ordinary people in our own country and people in Syria. It drives up crime and it drives up house prices here in the UK. And that is why today I'm announcing £36 million in new funding for the National Crime Agency on anti-corruption. A new anti-corruption champion in Margaret Hodge, and new sanctions on those using the illicit gold trade. And previous governments have neglected this fight. For this government, it's a mission-critical issue. And Madam Deputy Speaker, with events moving so quickly, the government has been taking every available opportunity to underlie our priorities. Today, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is in the region visiting the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Just over the weekend, I've discussed the situation with my Turkish, my Israeli, my Emirati and my Jordanian counterparts, as well as the UN envoy. My honourable friend, Minister Faulkner, was also just come back from the region attending the Doha Forum and the Myanmar Dialogue. Whatever the coming days bring, I can reassure the House that our intense diplomatic engagement will continue. And Madam Deputy Speaker, Assad's victims can be found all over the world. Many have found sanctuary here in the UK over the years, including filmmaker Wad al-Khatib. And as she said, there's now hope for Syrians to get their country back. The UK stands by Syrians like Wad, by Assad's victims across the world. In the face of uncertainty and new changes, we will secure the UK against terrorism and illegal migration while helping Syrians to achieve a better future. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for his statement. The Conservative government called for President Assad to go over a decade ago, and few will shed any tears at this vile tyrant's removal from office. He bears responsibility for countless deaths, torture of his opponents, the use of chemical weapons, and repression on a horrendous scale. 500,000 people have died as a result of his abhorrent actions and this conflict. We all remember the shocking images day after day of the barbaric impact of this conflict and the debates in this House, including the indecision of the West to respond to chemical weapon attacks, which should weigh heavily on our conscience. While Assad may have sought sanctuary in Russia, we look to the Foreign Secretary to explain what steps will be taken to gather evidence of the crimes his reprehensible regime is responsible for, and the actions being taken to bring him to face justice. And in view of the situation in Syria, I'd like to ask the Foreign Secretary what the government's assessment is of the implications for the Syrian resettlement programme, and can he confirm that despite Assad fleeing to Russia to claim asylum, there'll be no asylum claims from former members of the Assad regime in this country, many of whom will be associated with human rights abuses. Madam Deputy Speaker, what happens next, as the Foreign Secretary has said, is critically important for the civilians of Syria, who have endured so much trauma and tragedy, and for the wider region. Syrians need to be protected by those now controlling territory, and that means the protection of all communities, groups and minorities. The House must speak with one voice on that, and some will ask what the UK can do and what should we or should we not do. There are no easy answers in the days ahead, but I say it is profoundly in our national interest that we take whatever action we can, including with our partners, to help counter any further instability in Syria. Like ministers, I was also in the region this weekend discussing the situation with some of our key and crucial partners. With large porous borders, violence, insurgency and the flow of weapons in the region, can the Foreign Secretary give details of the work being undertaken to strengthen and secure the borders of neighbouring countries? And there is a significant risk of a power vacuum in Syria, which could lead to a breakdown of law and order, and of course a proliferation of criminal activities, including the smuggling of weapons and drug production on an industrial scale. So can the Foreign Secretary give an update on the actions being taken to monitor and respond to these criminal activities? Can he also comment on the risk to our security from foreign terrorist fighters being freed from prisons? And can he give his assessment of the risk of the state's weapons, including potential chemical weapons, falling into the control of those who would cause us harm and threaten our security? Instability can also fuel a rise in extremism, not only in Syria, and there is a risk that ISIS will seek to exploit the present situation, but at home this is also an issue. So can the Foreign Secretary inform the House as to whether a cross-government review of the security and defence implications and the implications for terrorism risks is underway? And of course, to what level can he share, and I appreciate this might not be fully in this House, what discussions are underway with our intelligence partners to counter extremists and security threats from the region itself?
There you go. That is Priti Patel, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, in a statement in the Commons after David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, said that Bashar al-Assad is the rat of Damascus who's fled Moscow with his tail between his legs. That's the Commons statement on Syria. And just to bring you up to date with that breaking news, also this hour, that a man is being questioned in connection with the fatal shooting of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, who, of course, was gunned down in New York last Wednesday. That man is being questioned by police officers in the United States. More on both of those big main news stories this afternoon at 5 o'clock with Mark Austin. Next, I'll see you tomorrow.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.